Hang on a second. As we said earlier, it's a shocking thing that President-elect Trump would actually appoint people who are loyal to his agenda and himself. I want to have another pass at that one. We got a few other things for Liz Peek, syndicated columnist, Fox News contributor. Monica Crowley, host of the Monica Crowley podcast, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Caroline Downey, staff writer at the National Review. Come on, Liz. Every major newspaper. Here's Trump. How dare he? He wins in a landslide, popular vote, and he dares to appoint loyalists to his cabinet.
It's become a pejorative.
That is a horrible thing. A loyalist.
It's such a stupid thing. And I mean, in fact, I was out on X today saying, how about ally? He is appointing allies, right? They are aligned with his mission. And by the way, everybody who voted for him wants him to hire people who are aligned with his mission. Why wouldn't you want that? What they're upset about, Larry, is that this White House is coming together in warp speed.
Yes.
It is incredibly efficient because they know they have about 20 months to get stuff done. They want to hit the ground running, which is a cliche, but they really want to do that. They need to have all their ducks in a row, get the people in place so they can get things done for the American people. And I don't think that's so shocking.
They've already appointed over 20 people, and the guy's been president-elect for 8 days. I mean, it's really quite
pretty good.
His entire national security group is done. They're all cooked. And now they're starting on the economy with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy that's going to chop government down. Can I just get your quick take, though? Not on we put law to bed. Monica, John Thune, new Senate leader. What you think about that?
Well, first of all, we are in a new age of transparency and accountability. The United States Senate should not be exempt from that. President Trump, Elon Musk, Vivek, they're all talking about making governance totally transparent. Today, this morning, the U.S. Senate did a secret vote for a GOP leader. This is unacceptable. They should go before the American people and tell them exactly how they voted. Look, my choice was Rick Scott, who just won a resounding re-election in the state of Florida, more closely aligned with President Trump. We're just talking about loyalists and getting his agenda through. That would have been my preference. John Thune is on the record supporting January 6 investigations, going after Trump allies. Back in 2016, that final weekend, big controversy. He was on the record on Twitter saying Mike Pence should be the nominee, not Donald Trump. I hope there will be no problems here. Senator Thune did put out a statement saying he looks forward to working with the president in promoting his agenda and getting it through. However, he is going to have 75 to 76 million eyes on him, Trump voters on him, and he will be on a very short leash.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So, Caroline, that leads me to the hottest news of the day, which is the Attorney General pick. Okay, Gaetz, Matt Gaetz. Now, I want to say before, you all get a chance to weigh in on Gaetz. Yes, it surprised a lot of people. So we went back, Florida State University, nothing wrong with that. William and Mary College of Law, nothing wrong with that. Saintly wife was an undergrad at William and Mary, I might add. Practiced law in Florida, private law firm, passed the Florida bar. This would be his 5th term in Congress. He won easily. And he's been on the Judiciary Committee all of those terms. And I'll say one last thing. Yes, he's been investigated for ethics. I don't know if the investigation continues or not, but it was brought by the Biden Merrick Garland Justice Department, which, as you know, investigated and weaponized and lawfare Donald Trump to death until Trump won. And now Jack Smith's going to be on unemployment in about 20 minutes. So go ahead. Matt Gaetz, what do you think?
And Merrick Garland's legacy, which still haunts many parents who were demonized as domestic terrorists. You remember that was just one of many dictates from his Department of Justice. That needs to be overturned. And Larry, I'll just say, just because a selection is unconventional or unexpected doesn't mean it's bad. I would argue that part of Trump's mandate was to disrupt the bureaucracy with innovators, with people who are outsiders. And, Matt Gaetz, he did shock, I think, a lot of people. But, to your point, I think he's going to be the antithesis to Merrick Garland. And, in terms of loyalists, isn't that good governance to prevent defectors and leakers, to ensure that there's cohesion in his administration? I think that's good for the American people. So I actually would argue it's the opposite of, oh, you're appointing cronies, and so that's just going to make it an echo chamber. No, that's actually what he was elected to do.
I don't know everything about him. I'm just saying you look at his credentials on paper, and they're fine. You look at the fact that he was called up on some kind of ethics investigations by the Democratic Justice Department. And I said, what the hell? That's the way they make a living out of that. And that's why Biden's out of office right now, is because people are fed up with those kinds of lies. Liz, the other sort of an analog, not exactly, but Pete Hegseth, all right, decorated military hero, well-educated Princeton and Harvard graduate school, wants to get the woke out of the Pentagon and wrote a book on the subject, okay? Woke, CRT, and you name it. And there may be a review of the generals. That's been done before in American history. George C. Marshall did it during World War II. So here's Trump, in my view, at least from what we know now. He said promises made, promises kept. The night he won, in his victory speech, he said, I'm going to root out corruption. I'm going to go after the D.C. swamp. That's just what he's doing.
Well, and I think in terms of the DEI stuff and the wokeness, it absolutely doesn't belong in our military. And I think probably 90% of Americans would agree with that. So I think Pete Hegseth is a great guy. He's incredibly smart. This is a huge management job, the Department of Defense. It's gigantic. I assume and hope he will get good people to run the Army and the Navy and all the various people underneath him. That's what's really going to have to happen. Can I just make one comment about Matt Gaetz and be a little bit of a discordant note here? What I know best about Matt Gaetz is what he did to Kevin McCarthy, what he organized in the way of a revolt against Kevin McCarthy. And I really disagreed with that. I liked Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. I thought Matt Gaetz really did that sort of inappropriately. And so my concern is, and forget that issue, he comes to this office now with a lot of people in Congress really not fans.
Well, it could be Senate confirmed. Monica, I don't want to have to say they're the equivalent, but it just strikes me, you're rooting out corruption. You're going to have to bring in outsiders to do it. People who are not part of the club.
Yes.
All right. I don't know Mr. Gates. I don't think I've ever met him. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. As I said, I looked up some of the salient facts about his career. Looked okay to me, blah, blah, blah. Pete Hegseth, I do know very well. He's a spectacular human being.
Great.
He will hire all the right deputies and undersecretaries and make a great go of it. I mean, but I want everything shaken up. Isn't that what people voted for Trump for in the first place? I mean, look at Elon Musk. Look what he did. Look at Vivek Ramaswamy. They're going to chop down the government like you've never seen, honestly.
You cannot make an omelet without breaking some eggs.
Yeah,
Donald Trump is the ultimate disruptor, and now in the second term, he has created really a team of Avengers. These are all incredible disruptors. Tulsi Gabbard going to DNI, Pete Hegseth to the Pentagon, Vivek and Elon doing their thing to cut government. The American people voted in a landslide mandate for President Trump to do exactly this.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, it had to happen this way because we could no longer go on with deep state corruption and a debt crisis and everything else. Trump is going to fix it.
I got to jump up. But Caroline, I just want to get you to take quickly, 20 seconds. What's National Review going to say? Do we know yet about Matt Gaetz?
Well, I'm not sure about Matt Gaetz, but so far, National Review has been very pleased with the majority of the cabinet picks. Very impressive across the board, including Pete Hegseth, not just because of his credentials, but because of his commitment to ridding the military academies of wokeness.
Yes.
My father was a captain in Vietnam. He graduated from West Point. If you can restore the mission of the military, which is to protect and defend the United States and the academies, then we're good.
I appreciate it. Very good. We appreciate it. Very good. Liz Peek, Caroline Downey, Monica Crowley, thanks to all three of you.